Welcome to the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict Part 16. My name's Greg Stafford, and I've spent a lot of time talking with people who believe in the Trinity. So I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar with the people who believe it. I've written about it. I've publicly debated it. And I have this series that I'm going to conclude in part this evening with the Prologue of John, that I began in order to try to look a little more closely at what is the reason or reasons for our conflict. Why do Trinitarian Christians and non-Trinitarian Christians like myself, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others disagree so frequently, and why has this been going on for well over 1,500 years? Is it because of something specific and explicit that we can read in the Bible and that's just too difficult to translate, and so there's more than one option for a person to use? Or is there something else? Is there something that's being brought to the text that isn't in the text that's confusing people about what it says? A big part of this series has been about reading the text in the simplest way that I can while I address the more difficult issues that have come up since these texts were written about 2,000 years ago. And that's not always easy to do, because to do it right, to discuss complex things, especially when they relate to the Bible, if a person cannot help someone who doesn't understand what you're talking about learn so that they know and understand what you're saying, it's not going to help them. It's kind of like the whole speaking in tongues thing, right? Without an interpreter, it's different, but it's similar in that you're not going to understand or benefit the way you need to. So I've done my best to simplify some of the more complex issues and subjects, and yet not ignore them. I just don't think we have to promote and engage in the most complex or difficult explanations that the fewest people can relate to and really understand. It was the most difficult for me when I came to John 1:1. That's why I made a separate video in an earlier part of the series, the start of the Prologue sub-series of videos. Because I knew, rather than make just a really, really long video, maybe 3 hours, and that's not always easy for people to watch entirely, that if I broke it up and I talked about it in terms of more simple stuff, that would help more people, even than possibly the deeper discussion of John 1:1 that we had subsequently, where we talked more about the grammar, more about the grammarians, more about the rules, more about the translation principles. And it just made me think that I was starting to do the very thing I didn't want to do so much, and that is debate. Get into these details and things that, while they're important, especially now, because we need to be able to explain why and how we translate or believe the things we do. Because many Christians disagree on these important issues. For me, the most important issues are the God of the Bible, the Messiah of the Bible, and the people affected by the Bible. You and me, everybody. More or less, depending on how you understand certain texts. But basically, in terms of history, that's what I'm focused on the most. Even though I engage in these extended discussions and videos and debates, I don't try to promote it. I don't believe that's the way I can be effective. The way I think is most effective is in discussing the more technical issues, making those discussions available, and then moving quickly and frequently into the more simplified understandings and explanations, because I don't believe these texts require grammarians. And if they do, those grammarians should be smart enough to break down what they know so that we understand, and now we know the same things, right? There's not this separation that seems to be maintained at times. And so really not everybody does have the same mind. You have to really apply yourself deeply into some of these verses or issues if you really want to be in a position where you think you understand. I think you can simplify things like in John 1:1 rather than get into all the grammatical arguments and issues and stuff. There are non-controversial elements like John 1:1b that obviate the need, make unnecessary. That's what obviate means. To just get lost into this extended argument and debate to see who can come out on top in some way with 1:1c. Well, if 1:1b takes care of 1:1c, shouldn't we be happy? Isn't that the goal? We took care of it. 1:1b. Let's go. No, we get to 1:1c and now we're back again. And what happened to 1:1b? No, forget about that. Let's talk about 1:1c. Right? It's more fun. We want to argue for whatever reason. Well, in tonight's reading, it can go in that direction as well, and for a little bit different reason. Well, textual variant in our last verse, verse 18. I thought about how I wanted to talk about that. I've written extensively about John 1:18 in terms of its meaning, in terms of the textual reading in all of my defended books, and I would say probably most specifically the second edition, most extensively, but the third as well. And then I also wrote back in 2011 an article that if you haven't read or seen yet, I recommend you do. So this is from my blog, November 1st, 2011, Bart D. Ehrman, Daniel B. Wallace, and the Syntax and Meaning of John 1:18. I'm not going to get into this article. Sometimes in these shows where I've written about things like this, I will go through the article and we'll review it together as part of the show, but I don't think we need to, because I'm going to simplify this in ways where if you want to read that article and go more deeply into issues related to textual variants or the grammar of John 1:18, the meaning of the terms, we'll talk about some of these things, but more of it. I put a link to that article in the description below. And if you have my defended books, then you already know that I've talked about these issues. So I'm going to skip the textual variant stuff this evening because I don't see any real point in arguing over the weight of evidence and whether, for example, in John 1:18, as you'll see, the reading is an only begotten God, the only begotten God, or an only begotten Son. Any other readings that aren't similar to that? You can have some variants like maybe only. In my case, I do a slight variation for John 1:18, like for monogenes in Hebrews 11, or Isaac, because the generation being discussed there, as we'll discuss further later, is unique. Because there's other children in the family of God who are sons of God in addition to Jesus, and so he's not the only son of God in the sense that you could see begotten, just like Abraham. Isaac was not Abraham's only child, although he was by Sarah, but in the sense of being begotten, Abraham had other children. Isaac's begottenness was unique because of what Jehovah promised Abraham and Sarah at the time when he was telling them these things about Isaac and that she would get pregnant. So there's a uniqueness to it that's different from just being an only child, right? Your only begotten child. You don't have another child. It can have that meaning too. And again, I talk about this more extendedly in my writings, defended editions, and the article that I just showed a moment ago. So I'm sort of summarizing some of the information there. But why do I believe I can skip the whole textual variant issue and leave a significant difference like that, that is Son, only begotten Son in John 1:18, as we'll read, or only begotten God? That seems a pretty big difference, doesn't it? Allowing for a lot of different interpretations, but maybe not a lot, but some significant variance in interpretation. I don't think so. Once again, like with my John 1:1 video, I believe if we just Think about it. We can achieve a level of simplicity that is inherent in these texts. We don't have to go to this complex extent of analysis, and we have this, different readings, and which is it? What do we do? It just makes, to me, it's easy. Because, as I explained in the last part of this series, part 15, if you haven't watched that, I encourage you to do it on John 1, 9 through 13. The sons of God are gods. Period. End of story. Done. Debate won. Twice and then some. You understand what I'm saying? We don't have to do these things this way. The Trinitarians want to make an issue for us non-Trinitarians who believe in the text, and they call us heretics anyway, like we don't believe in the text, and we disagree with them too, because we don't think their point of view is in the text, and it's not, but we'll get to it later anyway. The sons of God are gods. That is not refutable. To refute is to refute God and Jesus. Why? Psalm 82. I said you are gods. Who's he talking to? The sons of the Most High. Who quotes that text next? Jesus does in his own defense. I said you are gods. In his judgment against the sons of the Most High, you say, accuse me of blasphemy because I call myself a god? Guess what? Sons of God are gods. That's it. It's over. Why go further unless you absolutely have to? Right, because if the sons of God are gods, and Jesus, as the word is in the beginning with the other sons of God, Job 38:7, with God their Father, then to say he's, as the word, the only begotten Son, is really not much different, if different at all, according to how Jesus responded to the Jews in John 10 by saying, I said I'm the Son of God, and you're accusing me of being a God? Okay, sons of God are gods, even if they're judged adversely. I'm a son of God. I'm not judged adversely. The one judging sent me sanctified into the world. So what's the problem? The problem was the Jews, like the Trinitarians, reject the sons of God. They blaspheme the Son of God by claiming he's not good enough for them because he's begotten. And they say, well, that can't mean a creature. How can you have a creature being honored and worshiped? Right? They love to throw that emphasis on creature. How can you? A creature? Yeah, a creature, God's creature, his creation, what he said was good. There's not one single text in any biblical text that says it's a bad thing to be a creation that is good. Trinitarians are calling good bad. We'll leave aside whether or not they call bad good, but they have rejected a begotten, created, firstborn, temporal sense, we'll get to it more in a moment, Son of God. Not good enough for them. Not good enough for them. We're a heretic because of that Son of God. We are rejected as Christians because we believe the Son of God was created, never sinned, died faithful to his Father, no matter how much pressure was put on him. And that's not good enough. There's something wrong with that in the Trinitarian stuff. It's not, it won't work for them. It doesn't matter. Begotten can't mean begotten. It can't mean it. Why? Because it doesn't mean it? No, we've shown that's a lie. Because the Trinitarian doctrine tells them they can't believe it. They're not allowed to believe it. They love to run around and tell everybody else how they're in a cult, how they have to follow their leaders and what they say. The Trinitarians are in one of the longest standing Christian cults in existence. The Trinitarians reject what the text says and qualify it over and over and over again, as you're going to see. They do it not just with begotten and claim as a creation, even though sinless and perfect, Jesus can't be accepted. So begotten can't mean created to them. It's eternal generation. Again, something not in the text. That's their only option out, because they know there is no way out of monogenes, clearly, most likely, and really, in many contexts, only meaning only begotten, uniquely begotten, begotten. Trinitarians will say, okay, Greg, fine. Maybe it doesn't say eternal generation. We do believe that. We do add that to the text because, well, it's not in the text. But there's a difference, Greg. There's a difference between creating, being created, and begotten. Is that the case? No, it's not. They'll say, well, Greg, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it doesn't say eternal generation. Doesn't matter if begotten really means created. He's outside of time. This isn't happening in time, Greg. So it's eternal no matter what. Right? Wrong. He is in time. He's in the beginning. Everything is happening in Genesis 1:1 in the beginning. All those things are sequences. Time. Even if you go before the Genesis 1:1 time that the Word is in the John 1:1 beginning, you still have time. A day to God is as 1,000 years as one day. That's time. There's nothing that says he doesn't relate to time in a sequential matter based on thoughts that occur, beings that he makes manifest, spirit or other, and anything else that he does in sequence with another thing he does. That is nowhere spoken against in the Bible and everywhere presented to us as God actively creating things in sequence. And in particular, in the beginning, where the Trinitarians will try to transplant us from and outside of time, as if that they can do that, which they can't, because time is not a thing you can go outside of. It's just a relationship between things that are happening so that you can see the difference in when they happen relative to each other and other objects like the sun, moon, and stars, all the stuff that are specific time markers, according to Genesis 1. And so the Trinitarians are just inventing things. And as I stated in the beginning, I didn't create this series of videos to just make it hard with Trinitarians, to engage and debate and conflict. Yeah, it's the Bible and the Trinity in conflict. There's a conflict. You know that, right, Trinitarians? You're aware there's a conflict between your doctrine, and it's been going on for a long time? You know that, right? So I'm not like, this isn't a new thing I'm doing, is it to you? No, this has been a conflict going on for a long time, and the reason we can't resolve it is because your mind, what's going on up here? You see begotten, eternal generation. You see begotten, and it's meaning created outside of time. It's not just the way you're interpreting God when it's used in the Bible incorrectly, in almost every instance except for false gods, I guess. Because you don't interpret it correctly when it comes to the Father or the Son. That's obvious. We'll talk about it more in a moment. You're adding things to these texts that are making it hard. That's why things like only begotten Son and only begotten God just make people give up. Well, which is it? I don't know. Go on to the next text. Really? Why? Because if you're in the beginning with God and you're the Word or another Son of God, you're a God. It says so over and over again, not just in Psalm 82, not just in John 10, but every single time the sons of God are mentioned, because that's a Hebrew idiom, like I pointed out in my last show and in my writings long ago, and like everybody already knows, but the Trinitarians won't promote it. They know the sons of God are gods. And if they don't, does not God say they're gods? Does not Jesus say they're gods? So who cares what they think, right? At that point, we can't get the Trinitarians to see that the sons of God are gods. Then we're not going to be able to convince them of anything. Because that's exactly what Jesus believes and used to defend himself against people who were accusing him of being something not quite the same, I believe, as what the Trinitarians say he is. But even if they were God, they don't listen. They don't listen to his response. And it's right there in the text. How are you going to help them with that? They just don't see it, right? You can share it with them. They see it. They read it. They just don't believe it. They don't believe the sons of God are God. So they get all caught up and lost when they see this variant reading. I see this variant reading. You know what I see? Basically the same thing. Only begotten Son, only begotten God, the Word in the beginning with the Father as a God, the Son of God, the firstborn of God, firstborn of all creation, right? But he's still the firstborn of God because God's the one making him. We're going to get to it more in a moment. Explicit text, comparison and usage of creation, verb katizo, and generation, ganao. But first, let's get to our reading. John 1. Let me bring you to our text this evening. But I wanted to explain a few things at the start because we're going to take a little time off from these videos. I'll come back someday on the Bible and the Trinity and we'll talk about the creeds and ultimately other texts. But we've talked about so many. I've engaged in details that I'm glad I did and I think have made people more aware of things and benefited the overall discussion. But then I just look and I say to myself, you know what? It's not going to matter. Maybe to a few people in a few ways. They're going to say the same thing. They're going to just bring up the fact that begotten doesn't mean begotten in terms of being created, and I'm going to show that it does. They're just going to say that these things are happening outside of time when the texts show that it's in time, in the beginning, sequence of events happening in Genesis 1. All the sons of God are there shouting in applause. Jesus is one, only begotten one, firstborn one. Sons of God are gods, right? We can't even get the Trinitarians to take us there. They're denying us the ability. Well, they try. I mean, we can do it, but they delegitimize our use of the sons of God as gods to interpret these texts when Jesus is called Son of God and even uses the sons of God being called gods in his defense of being accused as a god. And then we try to point out that the variant reading in John 1:18, as you'll see, further makes plain, whether it's Son or God, the uniqueness of Jesus in relation to God, right? The Trinitarians are like, well, if we acknowledge all these other sons of God as gods like Jesus does in John 10, we might take away from the uniqueness of Jesus' sonship being a son of God, right? Maybe they see that as almost a threat, right? The sons of God can't be gods in the way that Jesus is God, even though, again, John 10, that's what he did. He's the one who said, you know what? This is a good defense. You're accusing me of being a god because I'm a son of God? Yeah, that's what they are. Psalm 82. Only I'm approved and they were judged adversely. You see, the Trinitarians don't operate within this biblical framework. They act like it, right? Like with John 1:1 and other texts. This text, John 1:18, other texts. But they don't. Otherwise, they'd be using these references like John 10, Psalm 82, all these other texts. The angels being in the beginning too, Job 38:7. They would be using all that as the framework for understanding the significance of Son, of God, when it's used in relation to Jesus while he's with the God as the only begotten God or only begotten Son, right? He's the Son of God. Sons of God are gods. Jesus said so, John 10. God said so, Psalm 82. Why are these texts that are not written or represented as being by humans entirely, right? These are the number one and number two entities in dispute when it comes to the Bible and the Trinity in conflict. And they're both saying, because one's quoting the other, right? He only does what the other one does, which should tell you something, Trinitarians, because he's not just doing it in the human sense. He learned everything from above, and he was sent not from his own will, but from above. Either way, what I was getting at is that when we talk about the sons of God and them being gods, the Trinitarians not only vacate that as a premise or a framework to use to understand these references, they create a negative feedback tool, right? Polytheism. You're a polytheist. Oh, well, then you're a polytheist, right? It's the same thing when they do the whole created. I'm going to get to it further in a moment, but it's the way, right? You believe a creature? You think he's created? I can't believe that. Well, yeah, the way you say created almost sounds like you're being ground up in a meat grinder or something just terribly disgusting and disgraceful. Guess what? He was firstborn of the one God. Why don't you change your attitude and perspective to appreciate that a little bit more? Because there's nothing wrong with it. And you haven't established there's anything wrong with it. You just speak like there's something wrong with it. You just speak like begotten doesn't mean created or can mean eternally. Doesn't say that. You guys are playing either with yourselves or with us or with both. Something's going on. Because we're in the text and we're made out to be polytheists. We're the heretics, huh? I don't get it. How could we be the heretics when we're within the framework of the texts interpreting it? You guys are adding all kinds of things. And I've just mentioned a few of them. So with that understanding, let's get to it. I know I spent a little time kind of explaining it, but we're going to take a break here for a while. And the Trinitarians, I'm just not going to spend them much more time. I don't see why I should have to. We have talked about these things. We have addressed the issues. They won't come around. For most of them, it seems there's just too much to lose. I don't have that problem. I was able to give up what I had. And I still have everything I need. So those of you who have to have the Trinity, keep it. If you need it that badly, and your faith is going to be ruined without it, just keep it. Keep the Trinity. Keep believing it. Because I'd rather you be there than nowhere within Christianity. And I believe that same thing is true for other groups too, that you otherwise consider heretics condemned to hell. In either case, I think I've made our case that we shouldn't be referred to as heretics in hell. And I'm not saying you should, but the way you talk about us doesn't make it too difficult to think the other way around when we can show you that you've got it turned around. We're in the text. You're what's next. You're all the controversy. You're all the debate. That's why I don't like to debate. I don't have to. It's so plain. It's clear. I can go to this text, a few little issues. By the time we're done with you Trinitarians at times, and in your grammars, and in your doctoral theses, and your other writings, your journals, I'm not saying I don't like them. I mean, I've grown to like them. You guys are smart guys. I can't believe how complicated you smart guys have made this, right? I mean, we can't even get through a variant reading in John 1:18 because you can't understand sons of God theology and John 10, Psalm 82, all the texts that we can use to show you we don't need the Trinity. You want it, keep it. I'd rather you have it than lose your faith. But you Trinitarians really seem like you would rather I lose my faith if I don't believe the way you do. Is that what you really believe? You really believe the view I have about Jesus and the way I talk about him and the descriptions I'm given and the texts I'm referencing? You believe that view is so bad and incorrect and outside of the text that I'm the heretic? I understand that in relation to the whole church history and doctrinal disputes, but I think it's time we move past some things How long is it going to take? Never? We're never going to get past this stuff. Never. I don't understand. We have clear text. I can get past it. It doesn't seem like some of you Trinitarians really want to. I think you can get past it. I think it would just be too big of a blow to your ego to actually accept us on some legitimate level after all these centuries of condemnation and heresy. It's so unfortunate that we couldn't have built up a better central base around some clear doctrine about God and his Son based on explicit texts. What a concept. John 1. This is our reading, friends. Last one for a little while till we come back to the subject of the Trinity. So I'm spending a little more time kind of letting things out. You know, I like to connect with you all. We do live shows as often as possible and most of the time. You know, I want to speak from my heart and talk to Trinitarians. I don't want to just debate and have people feel good or bad, or I won, this side won, or that's fine. I'd rather have everybody kind of get the sense that there's a way to deal with this in a less condemnatory manner. And if I'm willing to do that, Trinitarians, even though I believe there's conflicts all over the place, I don't understand why, when I've clearly made, I believe, a credible case, even if you're not persuaded, why there can't be some common ground when we're in common ground. Okay, you had your disputes over our translations. We stood up, we defended those translations. You know those translations are more legitimate than you're willing to agree. You know you're using the Trinity when it comes to your translations, no matter what. But you think you're right? Okay, fine. And we're willing to see that as a way you can worship God and a way to solve a problem you think there is if you don't use it to worship God. I'm not saying everyone who's not a Trinitarian can do that. But if I'm willing to do that, what are you willing to do? Anything? Nothing? John 1, 14 through 18. I'm going to read the New World Translation. I haven't translated all these texts. I've done verse 18. But you can read about that in the article I showed earlier and in my JWD writings. So let's concentrate on the NWT. I've dealt with the variant issue in my view, both in my writings and tonight with you. Because I don't think we need to get all caught up in this. It'll just confuse people. It'll make us think, well, which one is it? We don't need to think that way. They're both talking about the same being, the Word. They're both referring to him in a unique way, monogenes. But the two main readings with Son and God, there's a couple of variations of that, but basically, right? That's the same thing. How do I know? John 10. They accused him of being, because of his claim to be a son of God and his relationship to the Father, in John 5 and John 10. The Jews react to him and accuse him of being a god. It's like the perfect situation for us to resolve this issue, Trinitarians. Here you have the Son, the one you believe is equal to the Father in terms of his shared nature, divine nature, the Godhead. Here he is, John 10. Just stick with me for a moment. I know I have John 1 right there, but let's take this in this reading with us. Just follow me for a moment. The Son of God is right there. And he makes a claim about being the Son of God. And the Jews who don't believe in him are right there. They hear it. They hear him say God is his Father and that he's the Son of God. He's the Son of God. And then they start to accuse him of blasphemy. He says, why are you doing that? They say, because you made yourself a son of God. You made yourself a God. But same thing, because that's what he was making himself, the Son of God, Son of God. And that's why when he responds to their claim that he made himself a God, or God, we'll say for a moment, he quotes the text where the other sons of God are called gods. Right there. That's it. That legitimizes more than one God in the sons of God sense, which Jesus is, according to his own defense. And there is no translation issue. There's no problem with those texts. You just don't accept them because they conflict with what's next. And you've come to accept what's next, and you didn't see that conflict that was there, and now you have a problem. Right? I don't think you saw it the way it's there. It's there. You have a problem. Right? I see the problem. Right? If it wasn't a problem that taught the Trinity, I have no problem. I don't have anything inherently against the Trinity. I've thought about it. I understand it. I've read about it. I've considered it. It just doesn't fit. It's conflict. A whole bunch of them. Let's go ahead and read our final few for this part of the series and for the series as a whole for a while. John 1:14. So the Word, right? We've been talking about the Word the whole time since John 1:1. The Word that was in the beginning with God, who was a God, one of the sons of God. That's made more clear to us here. The Word became flesh and resided among us. And we had a view of his glory, a glory such as belongs to an only begotten Son. The sons of God are gods. God said it, Psalm 82. Jesus defended it and himself using it, John 10. And we have numerous examples that we've talked about before where the angels are either called gods or sons of God, which means the same thing. And that's what Jesus is. He's just the main one. He's the firstborn. He's the only begotten one. It doesn't say anything other than only begotten Son from a Father, or only begotten from a Father, only begotten with a Father. I'm going to go ahead and turn to that verse, but I'm going to keep it here for a moment because I want to share that text from Proverbs, which we'll get into further in a moment, on the whole begotten creation issue. But let's stay with this. So we know we've got begotten here, right? Monogenes. I believe it's fairly clear at this point that the translations and Trinitarian apologists who have argued for translations of monogenes as only, like it's monos, and without any kind of temporal association like child. But in this case, I think there'd be a little bit of a more confusion with using only child because God has other sons. That's the whole point of John 10 and other texts. But so that's why I think the generation in view here is unique, because Jesus is not God's only son. Just like Isaac is not Abraham's only son. He's his only begotten or uniquely begotten through a promise from the Father. And in Jesus' case, made directly by the Father as the firstborn. We'll get to further in a moment. It's a uniquely begotten sense that appears to be at least legitimate, and if not likely, in these unique instances where the subjects, the ones being called only begotten, Isaac in Hebrews 11, the Word or Jesus in John 1, there's other sons that the one begetting both Isaac and Jesus have. So when you say only child or only begotten, you're really only child would just create more problems. Only begotten is closer because it gets more into the generative aspect that's not shared by every other child of God. Uniquely begotten, I believe, makes that explicit and also captures the unique element inherent in monos, as well as the genes part, the generation part. Not that you have to break it apart, but just to explain it to you. So, only begotten, unique. I think uniquely begotten in the case of only begotten being applied to a child that has other siblings. I think unique, and they both fit because both Isaac's case and Jesus' case are a unique generation. In Jesus' case, directly by the Father. In Isaac's case, the only child of Sarah and Abraham according to a promise made at a time when she likely wouldn't have otherwise had children. So there's a uniqueness associated with that. It's not a only childness that's highlighted. There's a unique aspect, an only begotten aspect that isn't shared by the other children, which is consistent with the firstborn usage for Jesus in association with his sonship and with arche, right? All of these unique descriptions fit perfectly. So this only begotten with or from a father, it doesn't use the article there, and so I think a father is probably correct here, because it's more talking about the kind of glory you would see, like if you saw an only begotten or unique child or the only child with a father, how precious that would be for a father to have his only child there with him, right? So that's what John is saying. He's saying the kind of glory we got to see was from this only begotten, this monogenes that was with the Father. We get to see his glory. It says that, the glory of him. What kind of glory did the Word have as a God in the beginning? That of an only begotten. Right here. They got a view of the glory of an only begotten Son with or from a Father. They got a view of his glory. And then John describes that glory that way. Now let me ask you, Trinitarians, is the Father's glory that of a monogenes with a Father? No, it's not, is it? The Father's glory is therefore not the same as the Son's. So while it is also shared by the Son because the Father gives him his glory that he had with him, right? There's a shared glory for sure. I'm not saying that. They're very similar in ways that you can't even tell them apart really in the spirit realm likely, but being an imprint depends in terms of the association with that, right? Even the imprint and seal of the wax is noticeably different from the seal in the ring, even if its imprint is identical. You can tell that the wax and the imprint is not the same as the seal on the ring because of the material, the nature of the object. And even if you had metal being pressed into metal, like I gave in my analogy on that Hebrews 1 video, that's still a separation. You're making an imprint into another thing that requires temporality. You cannot have an imprint if they're both the same age, eternal. There's no imprinting. The Trinitarians create this ridiculous association between generation and eternity, and it just negates the whole meaning of the term in the first place. Right? They're just destroying the meaning of the term, just like firstborn, because they can't have it. Can they not have it because the text doesn't teach it? No. They can't have it because the doctrine of the Trinity tells them no. No, Trinitarians. You cannot accept a temporal meaning for only begotten. That has to be outside of time. That has to be understood in light of eternal generation. That's not in the text. You have to do that. And there's a difference between begotten and created. And so, it's not the same, even though it is the same. I'm going to show you that in a moment. And we're outside of time anyway, so who cares, right? It's just that they can't stay in this text like we are and just, okay, we saw his glory was the type from an only begotten with a Father. He's a Son, unique association, monogenes. There's other sons, we know that. Job 37, John 1, Genesis 1. In terms of the creative observance, the sons of God and their potential involvement, let us make. That could be the Father and the Son. Either way, the sons of God were there in the beginning, according to Job 38:7. And here, the Word is differentiated from them by monogenes. That's the glory he had. That's the firstborn glory. He's number one. The Trinitarians have us thinking number one is number none. Right? He's not good enough to even be number one. What do you mean? He's created. Okay, he's created, yeah. He's the very first creation of Almighty God as an imprint of his being. The exact expression of his glory, which we know is not the same according to that text and this text, because it's that of an only begotten from a Father, with the Father, imprinted by the Father. So when we see these things, we don't have to vacate the obvious associations and meanings, temporality being the primary one in these instances, because otherwise there is no meaning, right? Well, if it doesn't mean Jesus was imprinted in time at some point by the Father as the exact copy of his being, what's the imprinting? What, there's just always been this metaphysical imprinting that's just been permanently there, and it's an imprinting, but it's always been there, and so it's never really had to happen? It's just always been in it. I don't even understand the concept because it makes no sense according to the text, right? If you wanted to just say it's in the text and so we don't have to understand it, Greg, that's fine. I can accept that if that's what the text teaches. I don't have to accept it then if I accept the text and what it teaches. That's not in the text. Okay? The kind of eternal generation and thing, that's next stuff, and you know it. We all know it. I'm going to show it another time. But before you Trinitarians keep blowing it, I would like you to just think of what you're asking us to do. You're asking us to add to these texts the very thing you claim we do, right? And for so long claimed, right? Adding an A to the text, get out of here. You guys do the same thing in other texts. You just don't care about those as much. And so you make a big issue about the text you care about, but not the ones you don't care about. And you're not even right about either one. Maybe the ones you don't care about because you don't care about them because they're correct. But these ones bother you because you're not, and we are. We've proven it. You don't really have any arguments left. Just the Trinity. Just adding things like eternity when they're not there. When they're actually indicating temporality. Like everywhere. Firstborn, only begotten, Son, beginning. And we get none of it, right? We don't. All these terms, we get none of them. Granted life to have it, life in himself. Beginning of the creation by God. Proverbs 8, right? We're going to get to in a moment. We get none of it. Trinitarians somehow are able to dismiss all of those temporal terms and associations, describing the relationship between Jesus and his Father and his theos, right? Monogenes theos. Or monogenes huios, because his Son and theos, as we've talked about, are the same thing. Even Jesus showed that. John 10. His debate with the Jews. He won it. Quoted the text. We do the same. And so when we talk about only begotten, my friend, the Trinitarians have made us afraid to accept what it means. Because somehow they've just made us disconnect from the text time. And if they don't succeed there, then begotten's different from creation, which is not true, as I'll show next. And so this is what I was getting at earlier, right? Simplify. That's why I don't appreciate a lot of these guys. I respect Wallace, Hartley, Bowman, White, all of them for their knowledge and their dedication to certain things. But the way they have complicated or just, adopted what others have complicated throughout the history of these debates, I'm not saying they don't, it's just not that they don't have a reason for it, but that level of complication for these simple things, that bothers me, right? And I don't think we need to do that. And it seems like they're using it intentionally to get away with a post-biblical doctrine, right? We can't even read the text together and just read it anymore. It has to have all these other meanings that they import, right? They're not there. And if we don't call them on it, then we won't be there. We'll be like, okay, we're out of time. No, we have to be right here. What does the text say? What does it mean? Most likely. They want to take the most remote potential meaning in some way just to get out of a difficult text. Fine, go to the next. And just keep establishing that yours is the best each time, each way. And they're choosing the least likely option just to salvage a doctrine that they don't need to worship the Father correct. And if you do, Trinitarians, fine, but leave us alone. We do it correct. We're not adding to the texts. And neither were Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower and the NWT in most of these texts. You were wrong. You were wrong. And now you're going to be wrong, and yet you are the scholars and grammarians who are wrong at this time. That's going to be hard. That's not easy. I understand. I wish you well. Verse 15, John bore witness about him, talking about Jesus, only begotten from a Father. Yes, he actually cried out, "This was the one who said it, saying, the one coming behind me has advanced in front of me, because he existed. He existed. He existed, you non-believers in Jesus, the words in Jesus' pre-existence. He existed before me. And we also know that the Word, before he entered the world, was the one through whom God made the world, and yet it was his own. Seems like pretty clear pre-existence to me, along with John 1:1 and all the other texts, 8:58. So just a brief note there for you non-Trinitarian, non-pre-existent people. But I think you guys have it, you got the worst position to try to tackle, so I'm not even going to get into it. It's not worth my time. I already dealt with it. You had your time. I don't see you guys did anything with it, because you don't really have anything. Even the Trinitarians don't have much left, if anything. So why waste time with people who can't even see the pre-existence, right? I mean, how much time do we have to waste, my friends, with people who can't see these things? Just to argue with them? Just because they challenged you? I think I'd have a better time with someone who has no knowledge of these things and just wants to learn things right. If I could find those people, I would never even be talking to these Trinitarians and others who already know these things, unless I absolutely had to. Because there's no point, right? I'm just reading texts that are plain, and they're wasting my time. At this point, I know that. It took me a while to know that. I know that. Now I know that. I'm not going to waste too much time with these guys anymore. But I still have a little time left. Verse 16, for we all received from out of his fullness, talking about the Word, the only begotten from a Father, even undeserved kindness upon undeserved kindness. Verse 17, because the law was given through Moses, the undeserved kindness and the truth came to be through Jesus Christ. Final verse, at least for a while. I've really enjoyed these videos with you guys in terms of the Bible and Trinity and conflict, and we'll get back to them again, but we're going to take a break for a while. So let's listen carefully to our last text. It may be our most important in some respects, although it's kind of hard to beat John 1:1, in my opinion, right? 1:1b, John 10. I mean, there's so many. No man, no human, but we'll just say man as it says here, has seen, harao, that's the verb. No man has seen God at any time. And yet, if we go to Judges, the book of Judges, and we read the account of Manoah and his wife, seeing the angel of Jehovah, they identified the being as the angel of God. And then when that angel ascends in the flame of the altar that they make to sacrifice to God, they say, according to almost every, if not every Bible you will read at Bible Hub or any place that I saw, every translation I checked of the account in Judges 13, where Manoah and his wife see this heavenly being ascend in the flame, say, we have seen God. G-O-D. But it says right here, no man has seen God. Well, was Manoah a man, Trinitarians? Why do all of your Bibles that I read in English, in Judges 13, contradict this text? Every one of them. Why? Why can't you Trinitarians bring yourselves to, when it comes to texts like Judges 13 and the angel ascending in the flame off the altar being referred to as Elohim or God, Theos? Why can't you Trinitarians translate it that way? A God? Why can't you translate Judges 13, where the heavenly being identified as an angel is called Elohim Theos, when you know that's not God, you know they saw a being there, you translate that text, capital G-O-D, as if Manoah and his wife saw God, when we're told right here in a text you accept, that never happened. And all of you people who believe Moses saw God in the burning bush. That never happened. It was God's sons, you see. And if you could read more carefully and not go to the later texts and creeds, you would find out very easily that the sons of God stand in the place of their Father. They're given his name. They're given his authority. They talk as if they're him. So much so that Jesus even says in John 14, what? Have I been with you so long a time, Philip, or Thomas and Philip, all the people there? I believe it was, I sometimes, the accounts where Thomas and others doubt him. I get the names mixed up. But in John 14, when he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, he uses a form of the verb harao. Just like in John 1:18, no man has seen, harao. Okay. So how are we going to handle that then? Have they seen God or not is what I'm getting at, Trinitarians. It doesn't seem like you have a very good answer if you're translating Judges 13 in a way that explicitly contradicts John 1:18. Right? So you can explain, I guess, the way you do everything else, that in Judges 13 you'd think that's just another person of the Trinity. I know you do. I know that. It doesn't make a difference. We're talking about the text. I'm not interested in your explanation unless it's explicitly resulting from the text. It is not. The angel in Judges 13, whom they said they saw and was Elohim, God, theos, singular. We got the singular there in the Septuagint, and we have the plural in John 10. So you're wrong on all counts that the sons of God are not gods in the same way that Jesus says he is, which is why he uses that text in his defense. But I'm just concerned and curious about why you're presenting such an obvious contradiction for people. Why you have such a hard time translating a reference to another angelic son of God as a God when you know that wasn't God who they saw, and you know the sons of God are gods that both God and Jesus show. I'd like to know why you have such. Is it the polytheism thing? Well, then the answer is the same. It's not a problem. We just read the text and it says they're gods in this sense. So the sense in which you think it's a problem is not the sense of the text. So stop using that term. Stop using a term that doesn't capture the right sense. And then it might make sense. No man has seen God at any time. Thank you all for joining me tonight, by the way. The only begotten God. How about that? We have a text with early representation in papyri and codices like Vaticanus, Sinaiticus. There are also many other texts that read Son here, where the text in John 1:18 uses God in association with monogenes. It very clearly, in this text that the NWT is translating in several ancient texts, shows that the belief that the Word that was with God in the beginning was a specific kind of God. He had a specific kind of glory, the glory that is that of an only begotten who's with the Father. And then that same thing that marks his glory, him being only begotten, marks his deity. I was going to do another sign, but I pulled it back. You understand what I'm saying? If verse 14 right here says that monogenes marks his glory, and then in just a few verses later, when it says we haven't seen the God that's this Father that he's getting this glory from, right? That the glory is from, it belongs to an only begotten with the Father. The monogenes is directly associated with the glory of the Word that was revealed in the flesh he dwelt in among us. And monogenes is also the thing, the term, the adjective, right? It can be a noun, but in this case it's modifying theos. So the kind of theos that the Word is cannot be the same kind of theos the Father is. We know that from John 1:1, 1:1b, and 1:1c. But here, follow again. Let me make it clear, if I haven't already. Monogenes is directly associated with the kind of glory the Word has, and that we saw in part. We had a view of it that he got while he was with the Father. Verse 18, it's telling us that that marks the kind of God he is. But the Father does not have a monogenes glory, nor is he a monogenes theos. He can't be. He's the Father. The Trinitarians are defying every known parental association. They are defying basic familial representation. And it's so plain, is it not? He can't be the God he's with. He can't be the monogenes theos, if you're talking about the Father. They can't be the same, because they're with each other as theos, and the theos is not the same. One is a monogenes theos. It's the glory that he got while he was with the Father. It's a unique, special kind, begotten from the Father. Now, you want to say begotten and created are not the same. All right. Okay. First, let's finish this text. The only begotten God who is in the bosom with the Father. Right? Because now he's been resurrected, and John's writing, looking back and stating since his resurrection, he's back with the Father. The glory he had before he became flesh that we saw a view of through the text is marked by monogenes right here, plain as day. Then the God that the Word is, the type of God, is also marked in the exact same way by the exact same term. And even if you say son, we've already learned the sons of God are gods. Over and over again, this is not a hidden thing. It's a clear teaching. Jesus used it in his defense. So it means basically the same thing, right? It doesn't make a difference. He was begotten as a son of God. He's a God who is a son of God, just like the sons of God, Father. I mean, the imagery and symbolism is consistent in every way, and yet the Trinitarians are denying all these things, right? No temporality, no separation in terms of nature. All the things that we see in nature and that the Father made through the Son so we could understand these ones, because they use the terms that we were made with and understand and use to understand what we can't understand. And we can't even understand that because the Trinitarians say it's not that. Well, begotten doesn't mean begotten. Doesn't mean created. We'll talk about it in a moment. We're outside of time. In the beginning, it's outside of time. Right? No, it's an eternal generation. Right? Generation. You still want kind of a generation like a born type thing, like Isaac, Abraham, Sarah. It's eternal with them. So it doesn't matter what we do is what I'm getting at and going back to. They're just going to change it to fit what they can't allow. They're never going to allow temporality. Doesn't matter how many terms. Arche, protatikos, monogenes, huios. It doesn't make a difference. It never did. Not once the Trinity set in. That's what made the difference. That's what's making the difference. Even though this very one who's called the only begotten God is said to have explained him. We're sitting here arguing about all this stuff. And I'm happy to do it because I think it helps right now. But did he not explain this? Why don't we know this yet? Why aren't we united in a way that accepts that the only begotten God, the monogenes theos, or only begotten Son, sons of God are gods. They're with God. I said you were gods. Even used it in his defense. See, this is not a mystery. It all makes sense. Why is it then that with all these texts and with this text telling us that the one from the Father is the only begotten God, God in a different sense from the Father, explained him? It's almost like, it doesn't matter what he says. we can't understand it because the Trinitarians and others have created all these requirements to accept the text as legitimate. And yet the text tells us none of it. Let's look at it. So let's go back briefly to this whole idea of begotten versus created. And we'll first look at a text in Genesis. I had it right here. Genesis 6:7. Let's go to that right now. So is begotten the same as created, right? The texts were pretty clear, were they not? We didn't need to get into the variants, right? We could deal with God, Son, monogenes. It's indisputable. Monogenes really at this point primarily means unique generation or only child of a person. There's generation involved though. It's not like just only or unique and no generation at all. It's what Trinitarians want you to think. But even they're seeing the light, at least some of them. Or they just don't have any arguments left to present this non-generative view of the term. It's just theological now. They're not getting it from the term or the text. They just don't like the way it comes out. Genesis 6. You're going to love this because it's so clear, and I'm really tired of hearing how Trinitarians seem to hate almost a created Son of God. I can't believe they dare blaspheme the Son of God like that, right? I mean, even if you don't agree that he's firstborn in a temporal sense, Trinitarians, you have to see, you have no evidence, none at all, to support this idea that being the firstborn real creation of God is a bad idea. You can't be what Jesus is said to be and be that idea. No. It's actually the highest level of existence next to God himself. That is not bad. It's not bad at all. Even if he's created. And you have not shown that at all. And you have maintained it. And you've made a lot of people feel bad about thinking of the Son of God as a Son of God, as a firstborn, as an only begotten. You know what? Maybe it's time you feel bad. Maybe it's time you feel bad about demeaning the Son of God. Maybe it's time, Trinitarians, you think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and make really sure being created first is bad. I want you to prove it before you keep using it. Or use something else, because I'm worried about you if you keep doing that kind of thing and blaspheming our view of the Son of God. It has more credibility than you're willing to admit. And it's time you start admitting it, or you're going to lose credibility. Not just with me, but with the Son of God. Because you're demeaning him. You are taking away terms that are for him. And then we don't even know who is the firstborn of God, right? Trinitarians would have us think there's either no real first creation of God, or we just so unimportant we don't know who it is. It's not the Word. It's not the Son. It's not the only begotten one. It's not the beginning of the creation by God. It's not the one in Proverbs 8 who says she was created as the beginning of God's ways. It's not that. Genesis 6. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so are the Trinitarians correct? Are they right? Am I wrong? Am I making too big of a deal about this whole, well, he's begotten but not created, and there's a difference thing? And so, while I still feel Trinitarians have no evidence, no justification for this denigration of a created Son of God, you have nothing. Nothing. Nothing at all. And you keep doing it. You keep making it seem like we're blasphemers because we believe in a real firstborn Son of God. Incredible. Genesis 6:7. Look at this. It says, so Jehovah said, I'm going to wipe men whom I have created off the surface of the ground. Who is he talking about here, Trinitarians? Who are the men that he created? Because the Hebrew term is bara. The Greek is poieo. It doesn't use genao. It uses bara, just like Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Trinitarians, are the heavens and the earth living in the same way that humans are living? Because Genesis 1:1 said God created them. And Genesis 6:7 says God created men. And he's going to wipe out the ones he created? So is that just Adam? Because every other man after Adam was what, Trinitarians? Begotten. There's no difference. That's why there's no difference made here between Adam and all those begotten men and women being talked about as creations. Bara. Now, let's go to Proverbs 8. This is the text that's going to steal the show in this context. Because not only can we see here clearly that created is used of those who are begotten, there's really no difference, right? It's just the manner. Humans are born through a process, a reproductive cycle, whereas things that aren't in a birthing process, they're just created in a way based on whatever Jah the Father brings out of himself. All things are of the Father. But in humans created a cycle, a reproductive process that still gives life to new life, right? It starts with one, two come together, create a new one. But it's still creation. The child is begotten, but that's the same thing. Jehovah, the Father, creates us in our mothers, in the combination of genes that we inherit from our fathers. So it's just a different type of creation. But it doesn't justify claiming that one is temporal and the other is not. You have no basis for doing that. And you don't even have a basis for differentiating creation from begetting. I'm going to show it even further right now. Proverbs 8. We'll take a look at a few more texts and wrap this up, friends. I really appreciate you all staying up. I wanted to give a little more time and feeling and just really think about some things more deeply with you all, being that this will be the last Bible and the Trinity video for a little while, and it concludes our Prologue of John series. But in Proverbs 8, let's take a look at this whole creation begetting thing, because we've already established that there really is no difference when it comes to things that are created, where there is a difference in the sense of non-living things being created and living things being created or birthed through a process, but it's still creation. The reference that John makes in Genesis 6. He doesn't distinguish Adam, who he created from the dust, from the ones who were born after being begotten. Proverbs 8:21. So as we know, right, in Proverbs 8:22, I should say, we've discussed this text in separate videos. So I'm not going to get into the typical elements, the whole kana meaning and stuff. I've talked about it. But I'm bringing it up to show a contrast between created and begetting, and to show that there really is no difference. Not even in the text where the terms are used by the ancient Greek writers. So here in Proverbs 8:21, in the Greek text, it uses a form of katizo. So it says in the NWT, Jehovah himself produced me, right here. But in the Greek text, it says created me, which is what kana means anyway. Same like with Eve when she said, I have begotten or created a child or a man with the help of Jehovah in Genesis. Right? It uses kana there. And she didn't go buy or get Cain. She created Cain in the same way that Genesis 6 says, I'm going to wipe out all men whom I've created, and yet some were directly created like Adam, and others begotten. And yet it's really seen as the same thing because they're given a start to their life. They're made after they're begotten in a creative sense. It's still a start to life that never leaves the ideas associated with begotten in that sense of a human and the birthing process. That is the exact imagery we're given of the Son with the Father. So right here, as we know the evidence is overwhelmingly clear in the Bible that Jesus is the wisdom of God. The early church writers, even for the most part, accepted that. They just got lost eventually in the whole, again, eternal generation thing, or with Jesus as a man and different things. They have anything but what the texts teach when it comes to the Trinity, because they just can't have it. Remember, I told you that they can't. Once they accept temporality with the Son in relation to the Father, it's it. It's game over. So they can't have any of these texts do that. Not Colossians 1:15, not Revelation 3:14, not John 5:26, not John 1:18, and not Proverbs 8. Even though it says right here, Jehovah produced me as the beginning of his way. Kana, and in the Greek, katizo. Trinitarians. Greek text uses katizo right here. Creation. You say there's a difference between creation and begetting. The text says there's not. Look at verse 25. Before the mountains themselves had settled down ahead of the hills, I was brought forth as with labor pains. Gena me. Before all hills he begets me. Begets me. Verse 21, created me. Jehovah created me as the beginning of his way. Katizo, Trinitarians. Greek writer, ancient Greek Jewish writer. Verse 21, katizo me. Created me. Verse 25, gena me. Katizo and ganao are used in the exact same context for the exact same being that corresponds to only one other being who himself claimed to be that being, as I showed in my article long ago. Jah loves her, his son, the Word. And so, you are incorrect. There is not a significant, if any, real difference between creation and begetting. It's proven right here because they mean the same thing. They're used in alternating sequences to show when this being was created. And it matches exactly the descriptions that are given of Jesus, who was said to have been created as the beginning of the creation of God. Revelation 3:14, the firstborn of all creation. Colossians 1:15, the only begotten God. John 1:18. Proverbs 8, wisdom says she was created as the beginning of Jehovah's way. She was begotten, feminine only in the representational sense that wisdom is used, but not in the spiritual sense of gender like we as humans use. We all know that. And Trinitarians want to get lost and caught up on that and try to claim there's a difference between the femininity of wisdom and Jesus as the Word, or as a masculine Son of God. Well, then they just deny Jesus himself, don't they? When Jesus himself identifies himself as the wisdom of God, as saying things that the wisdom of God said, like I show in my article. And even up until the Diatessaron of Tatian, we have those two accounts combined as one, with the Son of God saying, I, wisdom. Jesus is the wisdom of God. He says it himself. The early church even believed it. And that's not my main reason for believing it, but it's consistent. They couldn't deny it as easily as Trinitarians do today, or try to. But they cannot deny any more credibly that creation is different from begetting according to the biblical text. They're wrong. They're wrong on that. They're wrong on eternal generation. They're wrong on all this stuff in John 1 being outside of time when it's clearly in time according to the biblical teaching of time. And they're wrong when it comes to the type of God Jesus is. He's not a person of God ever in these descriptions. There is not one single text, Trinitarians, that I can use, and I've thought about what can I use to try to legitimize some Trinitarian understanding to maybe bring everyone together, and I can't do it. I did. I thought about it. I thought, when I tried to look at it from the opposite side, and sometimes I can help you see things right or things you don't see. I don't see. I don't see where you're getting all these views except for later views we're not going to see in these texts. So when it comes to what we do next, I'm not sure there's going to be much of a difference, is there? Probably many of us will just continue to believe what we think is correct. As we've discussed this evening when it comes to these texts, I've tried to simplify it. I've tried to simplify texts that aren't always as easy, or they've become difficult, and I think in many cases, most cases, unnecessarily. But here we are. So we either give up and just leave everybody in this confusing mess, or we try to do what's best so we and other people can pass the test that we have been given. And I don't think it's that hard. I think we make it hard. We've made it hard. And now it's hard to accept because someone has to be wrong. It's unfortunate. But maybe there's a way we can all be right if we can just look to the light and set aside everything else and go to these texts and just ask ourselves, what do they teach? What are they not teaching that other people are teaching? Because it seems to me that if we ask those questions, the answer we're going to receive, or that's going to be apparent, at least to me, is the exact opposite of what most people think. And that is that we're the heretics. And that the Trinitarians are not. They're like orthodox. They're right. That doesn't seem right. It seems wrong. Because everything that I believe, I can show almost explicitly is from these texts. I can't even think of anything that I really require or would say is in the text and it's not in the text. I've given several glaring examples of Trinitarianism and how they try to deny the plain and obvious meaning and usage of these terms that are not complicated. Monogenes is not a hard term to understand. Prototikos is not a hard term. Arche is not a hard term. Theos is not a hard term. They have made these things so difficult that you have to spend years sometimes just figuring out what's going on. The idea of reading a text and just moving on is, they've almost made it into a joke. And I'm not laughing anymore. I'm not really amused, and I never really was. I wish we could have all just moved forward, done our best to deal with the issues of life and our imperfection that are tests already, rather than to have to constantly be going at each other and wondering whether or not there's a conflict between the Bible and the Trinity.